Hello, everyone, and welcome to this series of videos that provide an introduction to thinking about media policy, what it is, why we have it, and why it matters. It's going to focus in on a particular case study, which is the topic of why it's difficult to regulate and control commercial messages that normalize the drinking of alcohol. This is, as I said, is very much an introduction to ways of thinking about media policy. And the essential idea, I suppose, is to position media policy as something which doesn't simply regulate the media environment as it exists, but as something that plays an active role in shaping media experience and indeed shaping social experience. So, what I'm going to do is start off by introducing the policy field in relation to the work of Sonia Livingston and Peter Lunt, and talk about their work, which frames media policy as something that works through imagining a certain kind of social reality, and that in imagining that that social reality does something to create a particular type of relationship between media, the individual, and society. And what I want to do is talk about that and then relate it to a variety of different topics. And in the first step, we're going to be talking about the political dynamics of media policy. And I'm going to be explaining how it is fair to say that media policy lies at the center of global diplomacy and particularly global conflicts. And one of the things I'm going to be explaining is how media policy has played a central part in global clashes over um, conflicts between leading global powers over the last half century or so. And we're going to be talking about the ways that current debates around media policy, particularly American social media policy, reflects conflicts around media policy that have been going on for at least 50 years. The third step that I'm going to take is talk about the relationship between media policy and and consumer culture. And I'm going to be talking about the way that alcohol advertising in particular can be seen as representing, I suppose, much larger themes about what advertising does, how it works, and why advertising is a unique media form that's notoriously difficult to regulate and control. Because to understand why advertising is difficult to regulate and control is to understand a number of important foundational principles in global media regulation issues. The fourth step we're going to take is to talk more specifically about particular case studies in alcohol advertising, especially as they relate to social media. And one of the things that we're going to be seeing is how social media have taken some of the issues in how advertising works and how it's difficult to regulate and complicated those issues even further. One of the questions we have to ask is if commercial messages is if advertising is difficult to regulate in the first place, why do social media make it even more difficult to regulate how commercial messages about consumption permeate everyday life? And then finally, we're going to be bringing it back to think about the place of policy work in media research. And we're going to be thinking about contemporary issues around TikTok and how those issues reflect ongoing themes, ongoing questions that affect, that we can say shape at least our approach to media policy in the first instance. So obviously, we're talking about, when we speak of media policy and media and cultural policy, we're talking about acts of legislation and policy documents which originate in all kinds of places and attempt to speak to all kinds of different issues. And it's really important to be very specific about the kind of policy that we're talking about and where and when we're talking about it. But what I want to do in the end is just identify a few fairly universal questions that we can use to ask about media policy and to understand how we should approach policy work, no matter who we are or where we're working. So that's the overview of the next few videos that I'm going to be doing on media policy.